I first met Dr. Paul in 1988 while serving my third term as an Idaho State Representative. Over the years, he would help me with pro-life legislation, and we would talk about the principles of liberty in a free society. Not once have I known him to ever waver from his dedication to those principles. I have watched as some would distort his positions and report them in such a manner as to try to make him appear to be less than credible. If all you know about Congressman Paul is what you've heard or read or been told, I hope you'll watch and listen with a mind open to learning the truth. For those of you who are already familiar with Dr. Paul, this champion of the people and guardian of the Constitution, you're in for a real treat.
But in that fateful year of 1913, we had a few other things going on. We had not only the Federal Reserve coming into existence, we had that other little document changed, the 16th Amendment, which needs to be repealed, obviously. The income tax in a free society is not appropriate. If you want to live in a true republic and a government dedicated to protection of liberty, you don't need to declare ownership of everybody's income and then permit each and every one of us a certain percentage that we can keep. That principle of ownership of all that we earn has to be challenged because it comes from a very basic understanding. Our lives and our liberties come from our Creator, not from our government. And if that is true, the natural consequence of that is we ought to have the right to keep the fruits of our labor. But also in the Woodrow Wilson era, our foreign policy was changed, and he took it, and it was always, he based it on a form of idealism, a false idealism. His idealism was that it is the moral obligation of the American people to make the whole world safe for democracy. Well, it hasn't been very safe since 1914, and certainly the goal shouldn't be this dedication to pure democracy. Matter of fact, pure democracy undermines the republic. That's what the founders worried about. They wanted a republic, not a pure democracy. And yet, over this last 100 years, there was an evolution. We went from a republic to a democracy. Now, rights are relative. They're relative to the demands of the majority. The majority becomes the dictatorship, and certain groups get together. They get together and they gang up on the productive system. The non-productive, the special interests, gang up on the individuals who basically are the middle class, who's willing to work and take care of themselves, and all with the pretense that we're going to help the very, very poor who are falling through the cracks. But guess who gets all the help? The very wealthy who are tied into the banking system, tied into the Federal Reserve, tied into the military-industrial complex, tied into the lobbying system and all the power they have in Washington. So we have changed our course of history by accepting a form of government that is not compatible with our Constitution. Now, it is true that we could have changed our Constitution systematically if this is what we wanted. But we didn't want it. We ignored the Constitution. So the solution is very simple. Send only people to Washington who believe in and will obey the Constitution. There is no doubt we would have a different form of government and our country would be a lot wealthier. Instead of spending $4 trillion worth of debt overseas in the last 10 years, that $4 trillion would have been spent here at home, and there would have been a lot more wealth here at home. But today we have very few who are determined to follow the letter of the law, and yet everybody in Washington takes that oath. They take the oath to obey the Constitution. But just think, if we were strict adherents to the Constitution, would the federal government be involved in education? We don't need the Department of Education. It's unconstitutional. That just happens to be one of the 5 departments that I would like to get rid of rather rapidly, as fast as we can. But if we don't do this, our economic problems are going to get much worse. Our civil liberties are going to continue to deteriorate. So, other than getting rid of the 5 departments and going back to the 06 budget line, I do want to immediately, in the first year, cut $1 trillion out of the budget. Now, if you're interested in making comparisons, I think you know what the current administration will do. I think they've just given us a budget. It didn't go down. But look at the other Republican candidates. Are they offering any cuts? No. But they'll say they are. They're saying, well, even some of the budget proposals that came out of the stalemate in the Congress, and then the stalemate and the confusion with the super committee, and then the automatic cuts, they're talking about $1 trillion of cuts. They aren't cuts. They're cuts of the proposed increases. They're planning in this line item budgeting. We're supposed to be able to spend $10 trillion of new money over the next 10 years. So they're going to cut $1 trillion out of these proposed increases, and they call that cuts. Now, if you cut $1 trillion, over 10 years, that's $100 billion a year. Our national debt is going up $100 billion every month. I mean, that's how far removed they are from reality. So, one thing I sense is the American people are waking up. They realize how bad things are. They're trying to speak out and trying to get the attention of Washington. But I tell you what, the people I know there, except for very few, they don't have any idea the seriousness of this problem that we have. They think that we are somehow going to be protected because we still have the reserve currency of the world and they're still taking our dollars. But if it were true that we could keep spending money, running up $1 trillion a year debt, or $1.5 trillion, and we print the money that we need, if that were true, guess what? None of us would ever have to work again. All we do is print money and let the foreigners work for us, and we just spend our money. Everybody knows that's not true. So reality will set in, and there is no reason in the world to think that we are not immune from the kind of conditions that are existing in Greece today. And that's what we have to live up to and believe, that we have to get down to the basics and say we have to cut, we have to balance our budget, we have to have sound money, we have to restore the Constitution. But since 100 years ago, our freedoms didn't disappear overnight. Matter of fact, the disintegration of the currency didn't occur immediately. Between 1913 and 1971, there was steady depreciation, deterioration of the value of our currency. But in 1971, when the last link to gold was severed, we have since that time lost 85% of the 1971 dollar. Since 1913, since the Fed was created to protect the value of our money, we've lost 98% of the value of a 1913 dollar, and they consider that success. Well, they've gotten away with that for a long time. They were always giving credit. The Fed was given the credit for creating the booms, and everybody likes the boom periods. But if they understand economics and Austrian free market economics, you have to realize for every boom there's a bust, and we have been having those constantly. But up until now, the Fed always got credit credit for getting us out of the bust. They would just print more money, and it seemed to work. Governments would spend more money, print more money, and the confidence was there enough. We just accumulated more and more debt. Now we're up against a wall. We can't just keep accumulating more debt. Our credit rating has gone down once. It's going to go down again. And we're on the road to a real economic catastrophe as long as we continue to do this. So it is up to the current generation. You know, I used to talk a lot, and people still do talk about, you know, we have to quit doing this and running up this debt, or we'll pass it on to the next generation. Guess what? We are the next generation, and we have to deal with the debt and the crisis that we have today. But the one thing that we can't do is nibble away and tinker with the budget and not change a philosophy. This is why the revolution that's going on now is a idealistic, it's a theoretical revolution, and a change on what government should do. The founders had a very clear understanding of what government should do. And the government was not to be very complicated. The Constitution is not that complicated. You know, nobody in Congress can read those bills and understand them, but most Americans can read the Constitution and understand the Constitution. But the founders asked the questions when they were living under the oppression of the king, and they said it's too much government, too much abuse of our civil liberties, too many military officers marching into our houses, and they didn't like the role of the king, and they did not like it. Now, the founders were very well educated. They were educated in the classics, they were educated in biblical history, and they knew that the type of government that they had was not the kind they wanted. So they asked the question, what should the role of government be? And their answer simply was, a true republic, the role of government is to defend liberty. No more complicated than that. It is not to run the economy, it's not to run your personal life, and it's certainly not to police the world. That is not part of it. But somewhere along the way, systematically, these concepts were undermined, and the concept of liberty was divided up into pieces. Instead of seeing liberty as an individual issue where you have the right to your life and you have a right to your money, you have the right to run your social and religious life outside of what the government says, and also your economic life. But over the last 50 years, there's been one group that, you know, sort of defends economic liberty, and another group sort of defends civil liberties. But it's all one and the same. We have come to think that because we got off on a tangent in our early history because certain groups were punished. You know, they had less liberties than others. There's still a little bit of that. Is that working? How about that? Okay, how are we doing now? Are we back again? No? How about now? Am I back on? Hey! Before you knew it, we would have had a conspiracy worked up real fast. Now let me see, where was I? I was talking about liberty, I'm sure of that. In that economic liberty and social liberty is one and the same because we get our rights as individuals, and our rights come from our Creator. In our early history, we did have abuse of groups because we saw people as part of a group, and that is wrong. There's still some of that going on. I think there's abuse in our judicial system because when you see the enforcement of drug laws and a few other things, certain groups are punished much more so than other groups. We are far from a perfect delivering of justice in this country, but we've drifted away from, a real abuse in a collective sense. But just because we know that we're not supposed to punish people because they belong to a group, but we're not supposed to give privileges to groups because they belong to a group. And the answer to that is seeing every one of us as an individual. We shouldn't have hyphenated rights. We shouldn't have special privileges because we belong to a group. It can't be by gender or by race or anything else. But nobody can be punished, and nobody gets benefits. Everybody gets equal protection under the law, and that's what would happen in a true republic.
We haven't followed the Constitution, and that's what we ought to be doing. The system that we have today is ripping off the middle class and the poor. Can you imagine how great a nation we'd have if we didn't have the Federal Reserve System printing all this money?
Save a Constitution.